Today, I want to share why everyday life in Australia feels so different for Americans. Not through culture shock, but through the quiet adjustments that slowly reshape how life is lived. Asterisk: the first surprise often arrives quietly, without drama or spectacle. It appears in ordinary moments, at a cafe counter, on a suburban street, during a brief exchange that feels slower than expected. Australia presents itself as familiar to Americans on the surface: shared language, modern cities, recognizable brands. Yet beneath this familiarity sits a subtle adjustment that reshapes daily life in ways many Americans do not anticipate. Early impressions are shaped by an atmosphere that feels less urgent. Public spaces seem calmer, voices lower, interactions less transactional. Australians tend to occupy space without rushing through it, and this creates an emotional tempo that contrasts sharply with the American instinct to optimize every moment. For many Americans, the adjustment is not about learning new rules, but about unlearning a constant sense of forward motion. Daily routines reveal this difference most clearly. Shops close earlier than expected. Emails do not always demand immediate replies. Small inconveniences are met with acceptance rather than escalation. Where Americans are accustomed to systems built for speed and efficiency, Australia often prioritizes balance and livability. The result is an environment that feels simultaneously relaxed and disorienting, especially for those conditioned to equate productivity with personal worth. Social interactions reinforce this shift. Conversations unfold without a clear objective. Politeness is casual rather than performative, and status markers are downplayed. Australians often resist overt ambition in social settings, favoring understatement and humor over self-promotion. For Americans used to defining themselves through achievement, this can create an unexpected sense of invisibility, less pressure to perform, but also fewer cues for validation. Workplace culture reflects the same underlying values. Hierarchies exist, but they are softened. Authority is expressed quietly, and consensus is favored over assertiveness. Many Americans notice that confidence is respected only when paired with humility. Speaking too forcefully or taking oneself too seriously can subtly disrupt social harmony. Over time, this encourages a recalibration of tone, posture, and expectation. Even leisure carries a different emotional weight. Time off is treated as essential rather than earned. Outdoor life is woven into the rhythm of the week, not reserved for special occasions. Beaches, parks, and cafes function as communal extensions of the home, reinforcing a collective relationship with rest. For Americans, this often produces an unfamiliar internal tension, the feeling of slowing down without falling behind. This everyday adjustment does not arrive as a single moment of culture shock. It unfolds gradually, reshaping habits through repetition. What initially feels like a lack of urgency slowly reveals itself as a different definition of fulfillment. And within that quiet shift, many Americans begin to sense that adapting to Australia is less about changing location and more about recalibrating the pace at which life is meant to be lived. Asterisk: as this slower rhythm settles in, small behaviors begin to stand out with greater clarity. Waiting is treated differently, lines move at an unhurried pace, and frustration is rarely voiced aloud. Service interactions feel less scripted, less driven by the idea that time is being bought or sold. For many Americans, this creates an initial discomfort, a sense that systems are inefficient or incomplete. Yet over time, it becomes clear that efficiency is simply not the primary cultural goal. The adjustment becomes more pronounced in moments of minor conflict. Australians tend to diffuse tension rather than confront it directly. Humor, understatement, or quiet withdrawal often replace direct challenge. Where Americans may be conditioned to address problems head-on, Australia favors social equilibrium. Disagreements are softened, and emotional restraint is valued. This can feel ambiguous to outsiders, as clarity is replaced by subtle signals and unspoken understanding. Language itself reinforces this dynamic. Directness exists, but it is filtered through informality. Praise is modest, criticism indirect. Conversations rarely escalate in intensity, even when opinions differ. For Americans accustomed to expressive affirmation or decisive confrontation, this restraint can initially read as detachment. Over time, it reveals itself as a form of social consideration and effort to maintain comfort within the group. This collective mindset also shapes how success is perceived. Achievement is acknowledged, but rarely celebrated loudly. Australians often downplay milestones, treating them as personal rather than performative. The cultural emphasis leans toward fairness and shared experience, rather than individual distinction. Americans may find that accomplishments which once defined identity now carry less social currency, prompting a quieter reassessment of self-worth. The pace of life outside major cities amplifies these contrasts further. Regional towns and coastal communities operate on a rhythm shaped by daylight, weather, and community ties. Schedules bend easily. Time feels elastic. For Americans arriving with tightly structured routines, this environment can feel both liberating and unsettling. Without constant urgency, days expand and personal priorities begin to shift. Gradually, this adjustment seeps inward. Habits soften. Expectations recalibrate. The need to constantly assert purpose begins to fade. What once felt like slowing down starts to feel like arriving into conversations that breathe, into days that are allowed to unfold without constant measurement. This transformation does not erase ambition or drive. Instead, it reframes them. Many Americans find that goals remain important, but they are no longer chased at the expense of presence. Australia offers a daily lesson not through instruction, but through atmosphere and unspoken suggestion that life does not need to be hurried to be meaningful. And within this quiet reorientation, the everyday adjustment continues, reshaping not only how time is spent, but how value itself is understood. As this understanding deepens, the adjustment reveals its final layer. The most significant change is no longer external, but internal. Australians rarely frame life as a constant project to be improved. Stability, comfort, and emotional balance are treated as outcomes in themselves, not temporary pauses before the next achievement. For many Americans, this challenges deeply ingrained assumptions about progress and purpose. Over time, the absence of constant comparison becomes noticeable. Social environments are less competitive, less focused on measuring one person against another. Conversations drift toward shared experiences rather than personal advancement. The emotional climate feels flatter at first, fewer highs, fewer visible pressures, but also steadier. What emerges is a sense of continuity rather than momentum, where days connect smoothly instead of building toward a singular payoff. This cultural framing reshapes identity in subtle ways, without frequent reinforcement through praise, speed, or visible success. Many Americans begin to listen differently to their own energy, to their own limits. Rest stops feeling like something that must be justified. Slower days no longer register as lost time. The nervous habit of constant optimization slowly loosens its grip. Australia's everyday life does not demand reinvention. It encourages quiet alignment. The culture rewards those who adapt their expectations rather than assert them. In doing so, it offers a different kind of psychological environment, one where ambition is tempered by ease, and meaning is found in consistency rather than intensity. This adjustment does not happen all at once, and it does not look dramatic from the outside. There are no sharp cultural collisions, no obvious moments of resistance. Instead, it unfolds through repetition, another unhurried morning, another conversation without urgency, another evening that ends without exhaustion. Gradually, these moments accumulate into a different emotional baseline. For many Americans, this is the adjustment they never expected, not the accents, not the climate, not the customs, but the recalibration of internal pace. Australia does not ask newcomers to change who they are. It simply surrounds them with a rhythm that makes rushing feel unnecessary. And in that environment, a quiet realization often forms. Life can move forward without pressing constantly against itself. Progress does not always announce its arrival. Sometimes it settles in gently, reshaping perspective not through force, but through the steady reassurance that life, at its core, does not need to be hurried to feel complete.